So now that we've had a chance to play around with this sphere and using the AWSD keys and the mouse button to influence this sphere inside our sandbox, I want to take a look at the script and talk a little bit about what the script is doing. So I'm just going to go into my assets folder. I'm going to double click on the marble scripts, and I'll double click on the Force1 script. Now when I do that, you should have MonoDevelop open, and MonoDevelop again is the bundled script editor that comes with Unity, and you can find that if you go into your applications folder. If you go into the Unity folder, you should see, along with the Unity application, you should see MonoDevelop. Now for some reason, if you double click inside Unity, if you double click the script and a different application opens, it may open in Unitron or something else. As long as you're in a scripting editor, you should be fine. But if you want to modify for some reason, if you have a preferred script editor, you can always go into Unity Preferences and go into the External Tools, and you can choose which external script editor you want to use when you double click on a script. I'm going to let things default and just use the MonoDevelop script editor. And I want to point out that inside Unity, when I single click on a script, it'll give me a preview of what the contents of that script is. Now I'll just double click to open the Force1 script, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're looking at here. Now remember that anytime that you see a / inside a script, that's a comment, and what happens is that means that we can use just a common language to write some notes, and anything in the case of MonoDevelop, anything that's followed by a / becomes green. This means that this line of code is ignored by Unity or MonoDevelop. So when we're scripting something, scripting can be very finicky. Okay, so if I inadvertently get rid of a semicolon, and I'll just delete that semicolon and save, because I don't have that required bit of code, when I go back to Unity and I hit play, chances are I'm going to get an error. So I got a compiler error here. That means that my code is not working properly for the script that I was just modifying. And if I look down here, I'm going to get a script warning, and if I double click on that warning, it'll tell me what the warning is, and in the case of MonoDevelop, when I double click on that error, it'll actually take me to the line of code where that error is being generated. And so that gives me a few cues that, okay, I goofed up line 4. It's looking for something that that is unexpected, so let me try to hit play again and get that compiler error. It's not giving me real specific an explanation of what's happening, but if I double click on that error and I remember that I inadvertently deleted a semicolon, I need to introduce that. Now I can save it, and if I go back to Unity one more time and hit play, my script should work the way that it did before. Okay, so now I can regain control over my sphere object, and everything's working just great. I'll go back to MonoDevelop. Now, scripting can be very particular, and as we start to experiment with some of the scripts and add and modify content, it's a good idea to keep copies of the scripts, or to keep copies of lines of code and comment them out. For example, if I look at this script, there's a brief explanation that this script is adding force along a global axis. It's running inside a fixed update, and we've seen the update function before, but maybe we haven't noticed the fixed update. And fixed update's appropriate when you're dealing with a physics engine because it kind of disregards individual frame rates of computers. If you want more information about that, you can take a look at the documentation that comes with Unity for a further explanation. I'm going to skip down here to where it says rigid body add force. According to this line of code, basically what we're doing is we're mapping the WS and AD keys as they relate to this character controller. The character controller references horizontal and vertical controls. Horizontal controls are the A and D keys. Vertical controls are the W and S keys. We'll talk more about that when we take a deeper dive into some of these scripts. I want to skip down to this next bit of code that says fire 1 is the left mouse button. We have this line of code that says if input get button is equivalent to the fire 1 button, or in other words, if we press the left mouse button, it applies to a rigid body, it adds a force according to an XYZ coordinate. Now, all this script is doing, if we ignore the top half of the script, all this if input get button fire 1 script is doing is that every time we press the button, we're applying a force value, in this case of 25. We're applying 0 to the x, 25 to the y, and 0 to the z, which translates to when I push the mouse 1 button, we're adding a force of 25 to the y value of whatever object this script is attached to. So what happens if I say, well, let's add a value of 25 to the x value. So now remember, every time we see a number, comma, number, comma, number, that's a vector 3 coordinate system. It's an XYZ coordinate system, just like we see in Cinema 4D and just like we see in the Unity interface. So we know that the first value is x, the second value is y, and the third value is z. So according to this now, I've modified this script so that when I press the fire button, we should apply a force up the y value, so up the vertical axis, but we should also apply a force to the x value. So let me just save that. I chose to file save or command S. I'm going to go back to Unity. This script is already applied to my sphere object. So now when I hit the play button, I'll let my sphere fall to the ground. Now I can control this with the ASWD keys. Okay, and that's being controlled like normal. I'll try to get this marble to stop rolling for a minute, so I'll play with the keys and try to find a low spot in my terrain. Now when I hit the fire button, the sphere is traveling up, but it's also traveling along the x-axis. Okay, and let me see if I can counteract that. If I press the mouse button along with the A key, I can actually get that to kind of counteract that force. Now that's not exactly what I want to do. I actually don't want to hit the fire button and cause that force to to travel along the x-axis, but I just wanted to demonstrate how we can influence or map some keys to some functionality. So basically what we're saying is, if we press the fire key, do this next line of code. Okay, and the fire 1 key is equivalent to the left mouse button. Now if I wanted to experiment with this, I could just copy this whole chunk of code here, and I'll just copy this, Command C to copy. I'll give myself a few line breaks, Command V to paste. Now, fire 2 is another button. That's the right mouse button. And let me modify this a little bit so that if I press the right mouse button, I'll just get this to travel off in a different direction. And maybe I'll say x minus 25. So it'll travel still in the x-axis. I'll apply a force to the x-axis, but it'll be a negative value, so it should travel in the other direction. So I'll save this, I'll go back to Unity, I'll hit play, and so the result is now when I hit the left fire button, I'm applying a positive force to the y-axis, and now if I hit the right mouse button, you can see that I'm pushing the sphere off to the left according to my camera and according to my scene. So that's just a brief overview of how this script is working and some of the basic functionality of it. I'll go back to MonoDevelop here and I'll get rid of this line of code. And I want to point out that when I experimented with this, if you're not used to looking at some code, there's this function, this if function is testing to see if this button is being fired. And if you look at this big chunk of code, what it's saying is, if we're pressing this button, this whole line is checking to see if we're pressing in this case, the fire 1 button. The next bit of information that's really important is there's an opening curly bracket, and then there's a bit of code that's being executed. What we need to get is the curly bracket followed by the opening curly bracket followed by the closing curly bracket. This if open bracket, close bracket, that is all the important information that's being executed when you press the fire button. So if you want to experiment with this and create some of your own code and kind of test some things, you want to make sure that you get the if statement along with the opening and the closing curly bracket. Okay, we'll talk more about that a little bit later. I'm just going to clean this script up, I'm going to save it, and we'll continue to push this forward in the next presentation.